let me start by making a very obvious statement, and that is that the public service remains an enormously important part of government, and all the work we do is valuable and affects all Australians. And the heart of our work, of course, is providing sound, impartial advice to government. But we cannot expect to be able to provide that advice, and in doing so support the national interest, if we do not have a firm understanding of this region, the region in which we live, and the ways in which it's changing. In order to maintain the strength of the Australian public service in the years ahead, we need to embrace the changing global landscape and have the skills and capabilities to create opportunities for Australia from Asia's rise. This morning I'd like to speak a little about three aspects in particular. First of all, why Asia and the Asian region is important to the public sector in Australia, where we now are in terms of embracing the changes that are happening in the region. Secondly, if I may indulge a bit, talk about the experiences of my own department, DFAT, which I guess is well placed to comment on this in a more sort of diachronic sense, that is the last few decades or so, going into the future as well. And then finally, some observations about the sorts of capabilities that the APS would need in the future as the world shifts its focus indeed to Asia. So first of all, where are we now? It goes without saying, and none of us doubt that Australia's future prosperity is indeed linked to what happens in this region, in our region. As Asia becomes more central to the global economy and as global decision-making becomes focused on the region, we, the Australian Public Service, will face increasing competition for access and influence in the region. And that's something that my colleagues and I feel acutely if you look at the historical period we've been through and the future we're heading into. But that is why, indeed, we need to understand Asia, its cultural norms and its assumptions, the way its governments and public sectors operate, and indeed the characteristics which they, in turn, value. This concept is often referred to as Asia literacy, but it's not just about language. In other ways, it's been called Asia-relevant capability. It's a good phrase, and it tries to better capture the fact that it's about a range of skills beyond just language proficiency or language ability. This department, DFAT in particular, and certainly others like the Department of Immigration, the Federal Police, the Department of Agriculture, Customs, all those agencies that have staff posted overseas or regularly visiting the region of Asia, will be and are at the forefront of driving our engagement in the region, but it's something that the entire APS needs to understand and embrace. Let me just make some observations about where we're at from the positives. We're quite well placed already. I consider we have a professional, dedicated, high-quality public service. We have a culturally diverse population. We have leaders from all sides of politics who recognise the importance of Asia to Australia's future prosperity. And last but not least, and not to be underestimated for someone who works day to day in this world, Asia is a friendly time zone for us. And anyone who works in foreign affairs knows that it's a 24/7 operation, and the fact that we are in the part of the region where we are in the same time zone does make a practical, prosaic difference to practitioners. Furthermore, Australia's cultural diversity is a comparative advantage in building relationships in Asia. In the last census, for example, almost 1 in 8 Australians identified as having an Asian ancestry. In the APS, more specifically, 1 in 20 APS employees have a non-English speaking background, and that number is growing. And the majority of those staff, 63%, are from Asian countries. The challenge, however, is to apply those skills and knowledge from our multicultural workforce more broadly, and indeed to improve the capability across the APS. Because ultimately the APS isn't just about engaging with Asia, it's actually about delivering services to a diverse community at home, providing policy advice that reflects the realities of our population and our historical circumstances at any given time. It's easy, therefore, to be self-congratulated about how we are on the ball on this and where we're at and how Australia has long recognised the importance of Asia, but there is indeed room for improvement. Let me just quote one statistic from the 2012 APS agency survey, which contains, and I think, some sobering numbers about our engagement in Asia. Nearly a quarter of the agencies didn't answer the question about whether they negotiate agreements or develop policies, formulate strategies, or enter into partnerships with Asia. Perhaps they don't need to and they don't have to, so therefore that's the right answer. Of those that did answer, 2/3 said that they do engage in routine business with Asia, but fewer than half of them, so less than a quarter overall of the APS, felt that they were well prepared to do so. So obviously that statistic shows that some further work needs to be done in building that capability. It's fortunate that the increasing focus on whole-of-government work practices in the APS will indeed allow us to share skills and Asia capability across the APS. So agencies like my own, whose bread and butter is indeed overseas engagement, can both share our knowledge and indeed learn from others' experiences. Let me just articulate a few of those elements of that, those qualities and experiences we do have. First of all, we have our Australian missions overseas, and they indeed lead the way in this engagement. Let me just note that there's a mistaken belief sometimes that our embassies and high commissions are full of DFAT staff. In fact, there are many, many more people from many agencies across government in Canberra working side by side with officials from DFAT, indeed from many other agencies. And some of our biggest posts overseas, I mentioned Jakarta, Tokyo, Beijing, they're at the forefront of this whole of government thinking. And indeed, we had a recent APSC capability review undertaken in DFAT, and one of the positive findings was that the whole of government work at our major posts and our important posts overseas are indeed best practice, and we were very reassured to hear that, because it is indeed the pointy end of our engagement. So working closely with the colleagues across agencies in order to reach common goals and advance the national interest in Asia is a keystone of our approach to engaging in the region in order to benefit the Australian people. Our heads of mission, our high commissioners and ambassadors are trained to lead teams that represent the Australian government in its entirety, not just DFAT. Every head of mission is given an explicit instruction. They represent the Australian government, the Australian people, not any one agency, certainly not DFAT. And the best of our heads of mission live by that mantra day in, day out. Through our missions, through our whole government approach in missions, it's an important message we send, a cohesive message we send to our neighbours in Asia. And it's also, may I add, something we in Canberra could learn from and benefit from. Let me now turn to our own experience in DFAT, and please indulge me if I do share some statistics with you, but it gives you a good understanding of where even an agency such as ours, whose business is to engage with the region, has developed over the years in response to the challenges and the opportunities we face. Last decade or so, I'll give you some facts and figures. We have an inbuilt advantage, of course, when it comes to engaging with Asia. Dealing with other nations and cultures is our core business, and we tend to attract staff who are interested in the world and increasingly interested in working in Asia. And finally, and we shouldn't forget this, is we actually employ a large number of local staff at our missions overseas. They are an integral part of our operations. They vastly outnumber the numbers of Australians working in the overseas, and they provide some pretty key local knowledge, superb language skills and cultural insight, and qualities that would be impossible for us in the APS in Canberra to replicate with an Australia-only workforce. So therefore, don't forget that our locally engaged staff, as we call them, they remain a vital resource, not only for DFAT, but indeed for the entire Australian public service. The department in recent decades and over the years has made some very deliberate decisions about focus and allocation of resources to our own region. These efforts can be quantified by looking at the location and the staff numbers of our people overseas. At the moment, we, DFAT, have about 250 offices based in Asia. This is compared to 89 in Europe. A decade ago, we had 200 in Asia and 129 in Europe. So we've effectively transferred about 40 positions from Europe to the Asian region, and also shifted another dozen or so from the United States to the Asian region as well. And I suspect, without knowing the facts, that the same pattern will be true for many other agencies in the APS, which have a significant international presence. We've also focused our attention on opening missions in the Asian region in recent years. We've opened in Chengdu in Western China this year. We've appointed a resident ambassador to the mission to ASEAN in Jakarta. And in recent years, we've added to our agencies and missions we have in India. For example, we've opened a consulate in Chennai and established a fully run DFAT consulate in Mumbai, which indeed the Foreign Minister opened formally a few days ago. And if I could suddenly be asked which missions we could open tomorrow if we had the money, I'd probably rank Mongolia with its growing resource industry, and Eastern Indonesia with a consulate there would be the top of our priority list for engaging with the world. We've also thought about new roles for our people, not just in the overseas context, in ways that put them at the heart of our engagement with the Asian region and its people across a range of sectors. Earlier this year, we seconded a senior officer to the Business Council of Australia. That officer just finished a 4-year posting in China, so he brings some perspectives to his engagement with the Council, and our hope is that he could work with the private sector on issues like engaging with the region, with the economies, with foreign investment, trade policy development, and of course the G20, which is around the corner for us. We've also seconded and continue to second officers to organisations such as the APEC Secretariat, the ASEAN Secretariat, and we have a pretty firm practice of embedding some of our staff in foreign in foreign ministries in the region. So, for example, this year alone we have officers embedded in the Indonesian Foreign Ministry, the Bruneian Foreign Ministry, the Foreign Ministry of Myanmar, and we also have people working in the APEC Secretariat in Singapore as well. I should also mention that, of course, language, even though I said Asia literacy is not just about language, indeed language is an important aspect of the engagement. And for us, it's important for almost everything we do. And it's because of that that we've mandated that more jobs at our posts overseas require language skills. For example, in Jakarta, there are 15 jobs that are what we call language designated positions. That means that we're putting significant effort into nurturing our Asian language capability. We've always understood the power of language to engage with other nations. Not only obviously does it improve communications and respect, it's very often a key tool for understanding another culture and the way its people think. And that's for the reason why precisely we invest so much in training, language training for our officers, with a particular focus on those serving in the Asian region. Just by way of example, I think our current budget for language training is $6 million per annum, and I'd say it's, again, best practice in terms of foreign ministries training for their officers. We have about 2,500 people, if you include administration staff, a great number of passport staff. Even with that high number of 2,500, at least a quarter speak a foreign language to a high enough standard to do business. And I think that if you look at real percentages in terms of the pointy end of policy engagement, that's a very high perspective indeed. So of those 650 odd people, we have 100 who speak Bahasa, 86 or so who speak Mandarin and others who speak Cantonese, and we have 50 who speak Japanese. We have another 60 who speak Pacific languages as well, by the by. But a more interesting story is the trend of the last 20 years and how we've engaged on language training. In that time, the number of Indonesian, Mandarin and Korean speakers has tripled. The use of Vietnamese and proficiency in Vietnamese has quadrupled, admittedly off a low base, but still a significant effort is required to master Vietnamese. And our Japanese and Thai speakers have doubled. By way of comparison, French has dropped from 46% of our foreign language speakers in 20 years ago to about 20% now. It still remains the most common second language in DFAT. That's, I suspect, a legacy of a generation of students such as myself who had to learn French at school and university at a time when obviously the opportunities to learn other languages was not there. And I've always had this debate with secretaries past and present because I'm responsible for the corporate area of the department as to why we have so many French speakers. And the fact is that's a reflection of the Australian education system for the last 30 or 40 years. And I guess that's flown through the pipeline to us. And more than ever, we're also focusing where we can on our heads of mission and deputy heads of mission to speak the language. We have about 20 language designated positions for our ambassadors and high commissioners. And at the moment, for example, by way of snapshot, 17 of those heads of mission speak a language to a professional level. And that includes our ambassadors in Indonesia, Japan, China, as well as Malaysia, Timor-Leste, Laos, and many other countries in the region. We have 21 language designated positions for our deputies, and of those, 20 of our deputies have the language skills needed to really do business in their posts. That in itself, in my view, sends a very strong message to our neighbours that we are serious about ensuring that our leadership teams are equipped with the tools they need, and that we're committed to the region, and we are indeed ready to engage. I alluded to the history of the French language in DFAT, but if in-house language training is a short-term answer to meet our needs as foreign language speakers, we also recognise as a department that in the longer term, on the national scale indeed, new education initiatives in language acquisition are also vital. So I should refer to, of course, the Australian New Colombo Plan. We believe that by sending our young people to study in the region, we will aim to build an Indo-Pacific literacy and build ties to the region and its future leaders that will last a lifetime. In time, our hope is that the plan will deliver to the APS a whole new cohort of young Australians with valuable Asian language skills, new general skills and perspectives, and an innate cultural understanding of the region. While I'm on language training, before I move on, I should just address one question that's often asked of us, is why we don't simply recruit graduates with the languages that we want. Our view is that we train people when we need to, and we're looking for other broader qualities of engagement with our region. So what does the APS need? It's a skill set not just for DFAT, but for the entire APS. The skills we need to embrace in the years ahead aren't a secret. In many ways, are the skills we've always needed. Asia literacy is important. We need strong leaders with wide and varied experiences who make good judgment calls and who adapt with the times. Because whether we call this the Asian century, the Asia-Pacific century, the Indo-Pacific century, or some other term, Asia will be as important to the public sector in the years ahead as it will be to the private sector. We will undoubtedly need more people who speak Asian languages, more people who study Asia and keep abreast of the issues affecting the region, more people who have lived and worked in Asia, and more people who understand the region and its cultures and who can apply their knowledge to their work. I'm not saying that all APS will need the skills of the same level, but they will need different skills for different levels of the focus of their work. So in conclusion, knowledge of and ease in Asia will be vital for the future, and no one can afford to pretend that it isn't real or long-term. If we think otherwise, we're in trouble. We must always remember that Asia's rise is as relevant to us as it is to the private sector, and what we do will benefit all sectors of the Australian economy and society, and the standard of living and quality of services enjoyed by all Australians. So we can't afford to stand still, and I hope we have the basic foundations that we can build on across the APS, and certainly DFAT is always there, willing, ready and able to assist in a whole of government engagement on that score. So thank you very much.
Yesterday, the participants of Asialink's Leaders Program met in Melbourne to present the outcomes of their work. They were delivering on their work-based projects, and today the Sydney group will report. The projects are the culmination of a year of immersion in the key issues for Australia-Asia engagement for leaders from across all sectors of Australian professional life. The program builds essential knowledge, cross-cultural business skills and high-level personal networks in Australia and more broadly, and includes presentations from Australia's leading Asia academics, political, business and diplomatic leaders. Applying this learning, participants are required to complete a workplace project to enhance Asia engagement within their own organisations. This program's been running for 18 years with a strong network now of over 500 alumni, hopefully some of whom are in this room, and all of them will attest to the value and impact of this program on their lives. The project presentations are always an absolute highlight of our year, and they're also something that give us all confidence that Australia is in fantastic hands going forward. As we've heard already today from Chris, Australia is in fantastic hands with its public servants. They are highly skilled, they're incredibly dedicated, and they engage in continuous learning, as you are here today. This year's examples from the public sector participants are really exciting in terms of what can be achieved when public sector, corporate and non-profit organisations work together in a rich learning environment. Just to give you some examples, one participant set up a program of community cabinets specifically designed to engage our Asian Australian community. Another helped a major cultural institution plan for multifaceted engagement with China through a strategy to build tourism, strengthen partnerships with Chinese animators and filmmakers, and develop a more cohesive Asian collection in a permanent capacity. Others have developed a project to insert Australian business into global value chains, beginning with the automotive industry. And one is working on introducing Asia capability building into executive education offered by major universities for the public sector. The breadth of projects undertaken, even just looking at those public sector participants, is pretty exciting, and it demonstrates how fast our relationship with Asia is evolving. Contrast this with, I think, even a decade ago, when engaging with Asia was for the relatively few in academia, in business, in government, NGOs, the arts and beyond. Those wise enough to see opportunities, patient enough to stay for the long haul, dedicated enough to manage what were often hardship posts, and skilled enough to manage and navigate cultural complexities. Now, as we've heard already today, working with Asia is fast becoming everybody's business and everybody's challenge. The OECD estimates that the Asian middle class will grow from 525 million in 2009 to 3.2 billion in 2030. As Minister Rob said recently, the value this represents won't fall into our laps. The rest of the world has recognised this opportunity. If we don't take it, others will. With more middle-class educated people, more parts of the supply chain are being located in Asian countries. Asian businesses are owning Australian businesses or have set up sophisticated operations in Australia. and courageous partnerships are being formed. Comprehensive partnerships, like Australian law firm Mallison's merger with Chinese law firm King & Wood, now to form King & Wood Mallisons, interestingly known pretty much in the legal community and the broader community as just King & Wood. A complex negotiation this was, where the sticking point on the Chinese side was the name, with an insistence that King & Wood must take precedence. And on the Australian side, it was the absolute need for appropriate professional indemnity insurance across the firm. This, of course, wasn't considered necessary by the Chinese firm because it hadn't been necessary in the past. King & Wood Mallisons recently celebrated their first anniversary, where over dinner, in a very gregarious and slightly alcohol-fueled towards the end of the evening environment, the depth of trust and the extraordinary friendship that had been built was absolutely evident. As the number of companies based in Asia with revenues over 1 billion doubles by just 2020 to more than 3,000, and the axis tilts further towards the east, our continued prosperity will depend on innovative partnerships negotiated with mutual respect for cultural difference. Cultural differences that we don't tend to think about until the problems hit us, like why do we need professional indemnity insurance? Our growing Asian Australian population means we now have increasingly valuable and powerful connections with Asia. Connections that I would argue have not been adequately respected nor leveraged. Recent research from the Diversity Council of Australia found that just 1.9% of executive managers and 4% of directors have Asian cultural heritage. In Asialink's experience with the Leaders Program and with our broader corporate network, very significant talent is being lost in Australia as Asian Australians hit that bamboo ceiling and choose to return to their country of origin where greater opportunities abound. Talent lost often because of the unconscious bias operating in recruitment and talent management processes. In recognition of this, it was encouraging to see PricewaterhouseCoopers recently announcing targets to increase the numbers of partners of Asian cultural background to 5% in less than 3 years. An important revolution is apparent in Australia as the nation across so many sectors recognises the opportunity our neighbourhood offers. We're learning fast, and more of us than ever before are involved in navigating the complex web of personal and organisational collaborations that make up Australia-Asia relations. Increasingly, we recognise that respectful partnerships are key to addressing the significant global challenges we face together in this region: food and water security, pandemics, climate change, poverty alleviation, and many more. And increasingly, we recognise that when working with Asian colleagues, we learn together and evolve solutions together. Asialink's been incredibly privileged to be a partner in Asia-Australia Mental Health, where we recently celebrated a decade-long partnership with China. From having no mental health policy at all in 2003 to having just legislated the most advanced policy in the world and having rolled out training in all provinces, China has built on Australian experience to evolve new models for significantly greater challenges. We're now just about to enter a new phase of that partnership where collaborative research will enable Australia to benefit from large research cohort studies that we could not contemplate with our small population. In the task of building Asia capability, the public sector is, of course, on both the supply side and the demand side. The public education system is now called upon to ensure that students leaving school are Asia literate. To achieve this, we need Asia-capable teachers, and we need to give our students the joy of learning and building friendships with their peers in Asia. New responses to connecting schools with schools in Asia, like the Bridge program now operating in Indonesia, China, Korea and Thailand, are linking classrooms via Skype, enabling language teaching and project work to be shared. It's absolutely extraordinary to watch the programs that are taking place with this Skype-based collaborative learning. There was a wonderful example in Indonesia, between Indonesia and Australia, where rural schools were measuring water quality in their local communities, speaking in Bahasa and in English, and sharing the results and sharing the strategies for mitigation. The teachers trained together in projects like this form long-term friendships and professional relationships across borders. Extensive online resources for teachers and students are now available and being enriched every day through our own national, regional and global professional networks. These are just two examples of many rich online and face-to-face new learning environments created with funding and with leadership from our public education systems. Also, in supporting business, the public sector is key to advancing our prosperity, from opening up markets through free trade negotiations, building capability through programs like the New Colombo Plan, and working directly with businesses through Austrade and state and city government agencies. And of course, on the demand side, the public sector, like the private sector, recognises both the need to build as well as to leverage the Asia skills of their workforce. But of course, this is no simple matter. It requires leadership, it requires investment of time, resources, and again, it requires innovative approaches. One of the big challenges that we've faced in working with the private sector is the challenge of auditing the current workforce and the privacy issues that this raises. A recent report from the Diversity Council of Australia includes new work by Origins Info, enabling sophisticated name analysis to classify individuals by their most likely ancestral origin, simply on the basis of their name. I think there are 1.2 billion names in the database. Accuracy rates for Chinese, Vietnamese and Indians exceed 90%, providing an organisation with a very broad initial indicator of an organisation's potential Asia capabilities. The task of creating and delivering the suite of professional development programs and products to equip a large workforce with Asia capabilities is a challenge facing many Australian businesses and our governments. The challenge is increasingly urgent as global competitors recognise the potential of the Asian markets. Last year at the IPAA conference, I spoke about a proposal from Asialink's Task Force for an Asia-capable workforce. This task force was chaired by Mark Smith and included the BCA, Australian Industry Group and university and corporate leaders. And this task force recommended the creation of a new body to build skills for our increasingly complex engagements with Asian counterparts. Since then, I'm absolutely delighted to say, the government has committed to funding a centre within Asialink. Its purpose is to build Asia capabilities in the Australian workforce. These capabilities, as we've heard already, include better understanding of the diverse markets, the unfamiliar legal and regulatory systems, and the unfamiliar systems of government, an understanding of management and negotiation styles, and understanding the very different cultural context in which business operates. And ideally, of course, they include language proficiency. This new centre will provide executive training, applied research and advocacy for building these Asia capabilities. It's funded by the Australian Government, the University of Melbourne and the Maya Foundation, but it is also charged with providing an increasing proportion of funds through corporate sponsorship, philanthropy and fee-for-service payments. And I'm pleased to say that we've already been approached and are already working with potential sponsors and with those wishing to have fee-for-service engagements. The centre represents a small investment, Martin will be pleased to hear, with an enormous pool of potential benefits. As of 2011, only 6% of Australia's 830,000 businesses exported at all. Despite our economy's very strong services sector, only 11% of exports to Asia are in services. Helping more businesses, especially non-resource businesses, export to expanding Asian markets could provide huge benefits, with the Boston Consulting Group estimating that even a 4% improvement in non-resource exports to Asia would generate $275 billion in value for the Australian economy over 10 years. The centre will start offering new products from next year, but its importance has already become even clearer through the setup process. This has included interviewing business people from a range of sectors, from businesses of very different sizes. Their stories underline the need to do more to develop Asia capabilities. Most are success stories, but all involve stumbles along the way. Some found it difficult to understand an unfamiliar business culture and lost the confidence they might have in building networks in Australia, especially important in highly networked and relation-based Asian cultures. Others were shocked at peculiarities of regulatory culture. Some were devastated and realised that they could have reduced their impact with better information. Some even discovered obscure local taxes after a period of operation, meaning that expected profits were wiped out. These interviews confirmed the results of our survey and showed that businesses with greater levels of Asian expertise and Asia capabilities were more likely to perform above expectations in doing business with Asia. We've also begun mapping the potential to work with partners in the region who are already discovering that global firms are wanting to better understand the differences of working in Malaysia and Indonesia, in Thailand and Singapore, and they're wanting universities in Asia to provide this as well. So the centre is absolutely up and running and poised to work with the Australian government. We are not about reinventing, we're about partnerships. We're particularly about partnerships with the public sector. And we've been inspired by your innovation in recent years, innovations at state, at federal and at city government level. Your role as public servants is front and centre in both leading and building Asia capability for Australia's future. So to end where I began with the Asialink Leaders Program, Department of Industry support through the new centre now means the program will be delivered in 3 states, with Brisbane beginning in 2014 and Perth 2015. We look forward to working with you as Team Australia joins in the exciting task of skilling our workforce for an increasingly competitive Asia-connected future. Thank you.
I want to talk about some of the challenges and opportunities facing the Australian economy, and in particular how the balance of global power is shifting to a number of emerging economies, and what that means then for the APS in terms of challenges and opportunities. China is clearly the dominant story, but it doesn't stop with China. It doesn't even stop with our region. But within our region, as well as China, the Asia century, or as I like to think of it, and using Chris's terms, the Indo-Pacific century, actually encompasses a much broader group of countries. India, Indonesia, Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, and others. So let's just start off with Australia itself. When you look at real GDP growth in Australia, the outlook is for solid growth, not spectacular, but you know, we've weathered the global financial crisis, we've weathered the volatility of the last half dozen years or so, and while we have growth in prospect that's been less than our long-term average, compared to the rest of the developed world, we look pretty good. It's not to say we've got no challenges, we clearly have, and they're well documented. I've spoken a lot about them over recent years, but they're around fiscal sustainability, they're around issues of productivity growth, they're around issues of managing an ageing population and how that weighs on living standard growth and on workforce participation. On the surface, it all looks like a pretty benign picture, but it actually masks some very large and some very uncertain transitions that have been underway for a little while and still have quite some way to run. The most obvious of these transitions is around the changing external environment. The emerging market economies today account for around 85% of the world's population, and only in the last year, for the first time ever, have constituted 50% of world GDP growth. World GDP. So that is, they constitute half of all world output, and when you consider the growth in world output from year to year, they're contributing around about 3/4 of that, which says that their share in total world output is going to continue to grow and grow inexorably. Now, at the heart of this is Asia, and you can see the relative growth and the importance of Asia as the bottom two lines begin to close up as you move towards where we are today. Asia's tripled its share of world output since 1950, but there are very significant economic shifts within Asia too. Treasury's projections suggest that we will see China and India increase their share of world output, indeed with China surpassing the United States as the world's largest economy in the next few years. Now, that's not a story of a United States in absolute decline. Far from it. The United States will continue to grow. The United States will still be the most powerful country in the world and the country with the greatest capacity to exert strategic influence, but it does mean that its relative position will have changed vis-à-vis others. As we look further out, you'll see India, by the turn of the century, heading towards the same share of world output as the United States. And indeed, if you project this out far enough, India also begins to approach that of China. Even more pronounced is the decline in the share of global output associated with Japan. We all know the story of Japan, an ageing population and a workforce that is in decline. And indeed, the population itself is likely to fall and fall considerably. Now, we've not actually seen an experience where developed economies, very wealthy developed economies, see their population fall and fall dramatically over relatively short periods of the sort of story which we will face in Japan over the decades ahead. Now, at the same time, other new middle powers are emerging. Indonesia is projected to be a larger economy than Japan by the time we get out to the middle of the century. And indeed, by 2050, the 5 largest economies in the world are China, the US, India, Indonesia and Japan. That is, 4 of the 5 largest economies in the world will actually be in our region. Now, there are lots of caveats around this, and I'm not going to bore you with those. Lots of things can go wrong. But if they don't go wrong, it just highlights that a key priority for our strategic engagement as an APS is, as both Chris and Jenny have said, is to try to lessen the risk of disturbances and ensure the international environment's conducive to countries attaining and lifting their potential, and us being able to engage with them as they do that. And the APS has a critical role there. Now, it also has some pretty significant implications for Australia. The terms of trade is simply the price of our exports over the price of our imports. And we can take this data back to the 1860s. We've only shown it here since 1989. But if you go back over the last 160 years, or whether you go back over the last 20-odd years, the story is the same. We have just gone through a period where our terms of trade have reached record levels. And they've not only reached record levels, they've stayed high and are likely to stay high for quite some time. So what's going on? Well, effectively what you can think of as China emerges into the world economy. China doesn't produce very much in the way of minerals and resources, but it demands a big increase from the rest of the world. On the other hand, China produces, with its resource base, a very significant increase in global output of manufactures, but it doesn't actually absorb that many of those manufactures. That is, it exports them. Consequence of that is you both increase the production of resources and energy, and you increase the production of manufactured goods, but when you come to prices, you get countervailing effects. The prices of resource and energy goes up, prices of manufacturers go down. Australia exports resources and energy and imports manufacturers. Our terms of trade goes up. This isn't abstract. It actually is what has driven half of the growth in living standards per capita in Australia over the last decade. So half of the total growth in living standards is attributable to this change in the terms of trade. But what that does is, because we produce resources and energy, it makes it really attractive to invest to produce more resources and energy. So you see a very dramatic step up in mining investment in this country. We've all heard the stories over the last decade, but you can see here we go from mining investment averaging around about 2% of GDP to mining investment hitting around 8% of GDP before it begins to tail off. Our mining capital stock has tripled over the last decade. Mining production, most of which we export, has increased from 5% of GDP to 10% of GDP at a time GDP's been growing rapidly. Now, as the mining investment boom passes, we will see a very rapid ramp up in mining exports, and that's really, in a sense, the first phase of the impact of the emerging economies on Australia. Now, before I go into the other two phases, it's not only changed the nature of what we produce and what we import, it's also changed the nature of whom we trade with. So have a look at this. 2002-03, we sent about 8% of our exports to Korea and around 19% to Japan. In 12-13, those numbers are essentially unchanged. In 2002-03, we sent 14% to the EU, 11% to North America, 2% to India. 8% went to China. Now, 32% goes to China. The EU share is under half of what it was. The North American share is under half of what it was. The Indian share is 250% larger. So we've changed the nature of the goods that we produce in the economy, and we've changed the nature of the balance of countries with which we're trading. The second wave of change that I said is coming about, though, is that as the emerging economies are becoming richer, they're demanding higher quality diets. They're demanding more protein. They're demanding higher quality foodstuffs. Now, for us, that story has been a bit masked because of the high dollar driven by our resources and energy boom. If you jump across the Tasman to New Zealand, you see a New Zealand dairy farmer very, very happy with the way the world is because their exchange rate's gone up in response to agricultural prices. You talk to an Australian dairy farmer, they're not so happy because our exchange rate's gone up on the back of resource and energy prices, which have gone up more, so they haven't felt that they've become as wealthy as their New Zealand counterparts. But what it does say is that if you're a foreigner looking at Australia, Australia's a very attractive place to invest in agriculture and food production. And we're seeing that now. You've only got to look at the Warrnambool cheese and butter factory example. Now, what will happen as we look forward is that we here in Australia will face a challenge in sustaining the growth of our economy and living standards. without a sharp increase in our productivity growth performance. Because we'll have a decline in terms of trade, that is, we will have passed that peak in prices, the global supply will have expanded, that will begin to put downward pressure on price, so that big boost that we had in national income will actually work against us over the decades ahead. And we'll have an ageing of the population, and that means lower workforce participation, and that means slower GDP growth, everything else being equal. But what we can do is we can look to the emergence of Asia to help drive productivity growth at home and to piggyback off growth in the region. Now, I said Asia's share of global output will continue to increase, but what you will see is, just as we experienced post-World War II, you will see the economies in the region begin to progressively slow their growth. And this occurs because if you think that the developed economies are out here, as you adopt technologies and market structures and like similar to those, you can grow very rapidly. But as you begin to get closer to the developed economies and your population begins to age, your productivity levels have approached their levels, that is the advanced world's levels, you must, by definition, begin to slow to something closer to advanced economy growth rates. And that's the sort of story that this chart's showing. So there'll be continued growth, and it'll be growth for much bigger economies, but it will slow over time. Now, Jenny mentioned the Asian middle class. This is really the third wave of impacts, potential impacts on Australia. Available projections suggest that the Asia Pacific middle class, so that's excluding North America, which is the red bar here, grows from around about 500 million at the end of the last decade to something like 1.7 billion by the end of this decade, and something like 3.2 billion by 2030. This will this will have a number of impacts. First, it will mean by 2020 the Asian middle class will have more purchasing power than any other middle class in the world, including that of the United States. Second, it means that by the time we get to 2030, the Asian middle class will be larger than the entire middle class throughout the rest of the world. That's going to have huge impacts in terms of the sorts of things that people are looking for and the sorts of opportunities open to us. There'll be a huge increase in demand for high-end goods. So for countries that have niche, sophisticated manufacturing opportunities, there'll be an opportunity there for countries like Australia. We will need to move beyond commodity exports. We will need to focus more on services and servicing the experiential desires that middle-class consumers have. So tourism, education, health services, legal services, and so on. Now, while we were preordained to benefit from the mining part of the global restructuring, and we're now seeing a similar effect in agriculture, there is no reason we are preordained to benefit from the growth in the middle class. We will have to compete, and we'll have to compete hard to benefit from that. And it's worth reminding ourselves that Berlin is closer to Beijing than Brisbane is to Beijing. So we love to say it's our region, but let's be realistic about it. So we've got to build on our existing bilateral relationships as an APS, and that's been an important priority for Treasury. We've been represented in Japan for decades now, in Beijing since the early 1990s, Jakarta from about the same time, and in Delhi over the last 2 years. We're not just represented in embassies though. We have memoranda of understanding with Chinese NDRC, which is the Chinese agency with overarching responsibility for economic policy. We have deep and extensive engagement, official dialogues every year, ad hoc dialogues covering a whole range of technical issues. We do similar things with the Indian Ministry of Finance, the Indonesian Fiscal Policy Agency, the Vietnamese Ministry of Finance. Since 2005, we've had 9 Treasury officials on long and short-term deployments inside the Indonesian Ministry of Finance. We currently have 3 senior Treasury staff in the Indonesian Ministry of Finance at the moment, and we'll shortly have an Indonesian official joining us on a long-term secondment. But again, it's not just agency-to-agency relationships. We've also got to utilise the fora in which we're members. So we've provided support to Indonesia as they've hosted the APEC Finance Ministers process, and indeed, like DFAT has done at other times, we put somebody into the Indonesian bureaucracy to help them drive part of their host year agenda. And similarly, the Chinese authorities and ourselves are very much focused on how do we use our hosting of G20 and theirs of APEC to build stronger relationships. So that just leads me to where I just want to conclude, which is as the centre of global economic gravity shifts towards Asia, for the APS, increasing engagement in the region is going to be critical. It'll be critical to improve our understanding of what's happening. It'll be critical to help us manage the challenges and opportunities that this shift will bring. But again, echoing Jenny and Chris, it's going to require a sustained commitment over many, many years. And it's going to require a sustained commitment from all parts of our bureaucracy. Thank you.
I'm very involved in Indonesian bureaucracy reform, and twice I'm very involved in the preparation of Indonesian civil service law and 1991 law on Indonesian civil service. And now we are waiting for the enaction of this new law, Indonesian civil service law, which hopefully to be enacted in late November, or this is already late November, in early December, this next month, not next year, next month. So with that, Indonesia will have on a very strong foundation to reform the Indonesian civil service. I will talk this time about the Indonesian public sector governance as we are entering the Asian century. We have heard from early this morning about Asian century. Asian century is a very catchy kind of a term lately I think in Australia, because I read these white books on Australia in the Asian century. And in Indonesia, we start propagating this Asian century, make the government aware that the government has to do something as we are entering the Asian century. I think this is what I'm going to talk in this session. And I think when we are talking about Asian century, this is the countries that will become the powerhouses of the world economy in the future. And 7 of them will be the engine of Asian economy as well as the global economy, because 7 countries, China, India, Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, and Vietnam will produce about 78% of Asian GDP and about 53% of global world GDP. And I think Martin has, what you call it, remind you about the Asia in that. But even though China will become the #1 economy of the world, surpassing the state, but China is not free this is the magnitude of the share of Asia in the global world, and Asia GDP will be 174 trillion, which is about 53% of the world GDP at the time. And Indonesia will be in one of that 7 countries. I think we are on the right track, and we will do it right this time. And if we don't make mistake, then I think we will be there joining the economic powerhouse of the country, but of the Asia. But even though the GDP growth is amazing in a sense, but none of this, the new powerhouse, economic powerhouse of Asia is free from middle income trap until now. So that we should be, this is the middle income trap that those Asian countries, including China, will face if they made a mistake. And out of that 7 Asian countries, only South Korea can overcome the middle income trap. They can avoid the middle income trap because with technology, they already reach a very high economic growth with what we call with technology and innovation. So they are already more or less free from middle income trap. But China and other developing countries in Africa, in Latin America, like Brasilia and South Africa, is not yet free from middle income trap, as well as Indonesia. If we don't work harder and continue the growth at its present trajectory, then for sure we will lead to middle income trap. But in other words, we have to work extra hard in the coming 2 or 3 decades in order to be able to avoid this middle income trap. Let's look at Indonesia. Here, Indonesia today. This is the 16th largest economy of the world, with 45 million consuming class. Of that, more or less 2 billion middle income class of Asia. The middle income, 53% of our population will be urban. They are producing 74% of our GNP. And we have right now 55 million skilled workers in Indonesian economy. Then if everything goes in the present trajectory, by 2030, Indonesia is expected to become the 7th largest economy of the world. And I think Hugh White, a professor at ANU, was very correct when he said that we have a rich neighbor in our doorstep. That's very true. In GNP terms, Indonesian economy is slightly larger than Australian GNP now, economy. And we have, by that time, 135 million consuming class. So a lot of services are needed by this middle income class. They need good education, they need good health services, and other things that Australia has the advantage, I think. And we have 113 million skilled workers and about 1.8 trillion market opportunity for. Then Indonesia also, where is that? Oh. Where is the other? Okay. Indonesia has other advantage compared to China and to India. We are now, where I put it? Here. We have what we call demographic window of opportunity because our productive population is much, much larger with a very low dependency ratio. And China is, the Chinese productive population already shrinking now because of their one-child policy in the past. And very soon China will have a lower growth rate because they have a shrinking workforce. But Indonesia is still growing the productive population. We have 155 million, what do you call it? That's, we have 140 million productive population. It will become 157 million, 167 million by 2020, and 193 million by 2030. So a lot of productive population with very low dependency rate. And this will be a social capital for Indonesian development in the future. And so let me return to the other part. And this is the trajectory that we are going to push in the coming 2-3 decades in order to avoid the middle income trap. We are right now on the $5,000 GNP per capita. And then hopefully if everything goes well, and we can choose the right president in 2014. I think the tapping is about, want to know about who will be the president of Indonesia. So don't take it very serious, but I think that your neighbors sometimes want to know if even neighbors can have a role, I think, even husband and wife can have a role from time to time. So I think this latest row between Indonesia and Australia, you just don't take it very seriously. Probably because the Australian government want to know who will be the president for Indonesia in 2014. And of course, as a good friend, as a good neighbor, you can just call like that. You don't have to tap. And but sometimes government doesn't work as human, you see. I'm also in the government, so this is the trajectory of our economy in the future, and also that's the strategy that we are going to, I think, to implement from the factor-driven economy to efficiency-driven economy. Right now, about 46% of our economy is already efficiency-driven economy, and we are going to push further the economy into the innovation-driven economy in order to reach this level of economic growth. But this will not be easy for Indonesia because we have a problem in our public sector that we have to solve in order to reach a very high economic growth. Number one is the problem of poverty and disparity. If you look at this poverty severity index of Indonesia provinces, Papua at the top is 7 times more severe in poverty compared to other parts of Indonesia. And that we have to solve that in order to, what you call it, to make Indonesian development inclusive the result of development is felt by all Indonesians. We don't want the result of Indonesian development only improve the quality of Javanese, but we want it to make to improve the quality of all Indonesian. And this is one problem that has to be solved by Indonesian civil service. The other one about our very poor, dilapidated kind of infrastructure, including electric power deficit. If you look at this, the production, the consumption of electricity per capita is only 1/4 of Thailand, 1/7 of Malaysia, and about 1/12 of Singapore. So Indonesia has to build this sorry, you have to, we have to improve this electric power deficit, and a lot of investment opportunity for Australian company here. In terms of education, we still have to do something for our education, even though Indonesia is already, if you compare Indonesia with other low middle income countries, Indonesia already in the high middle income countries in terms of our spending on education and our performance in education. Okay, right. I'll try to be quick. And this is another thing that concerning the public sector. If you are looking at the innovation and the technology preparedness, Indonesia is one of the countries which is very ITC savvy or technology savvy. There are 238 million cell phone users in Indonesia. So one telephone for every, this is 237 million for 237 for people. In Indonesia, there are 57 million Facebookers, about 6 million Twitters tweet each other every day. There are 63 million internet users, and internet business become very large in Indonesia, 129 billion now, and it's expected to be expanding 10 times within 5 years. And this is, you see, the growth of internet business in Indonesia, very, very fast. And with that, what we need in Indonesia, and this all will not be solved, and those growth rate will not be achieved if Indonesia does not, what you call it, reform its public service. This is the Indonesian public service condition right now. And this is the latest survey on Indonesian Governance Index, just released last month. And the green one is the best one, and the red is the bad one. If you look at the 33 provinces, the best governed provinces is Yogyakarta, Jawa Timur is Java, Jakarta, and South Sumatra, Riau, North Sumatra, Jambi, Lampung, and Bali, and the rest is more or less need to be developed. And with these situations, I think I want to conclude, because I've been reminded by Peter, and this is the only part in my paper that I will read fully. This is half a page concluding remark in my full paper. I want to conclude with some remark concerning Indonesia and Australia new level of relationship that are mutually beneficial to both people and countries as they enter the Asian century. As setting relationship right is crucial for both countries and for our region, the two countries need to build relationship based on a stronger and much broader foundation in the coming decade. I fully agree with Professor Hu's observation that a strong and lasting relationship between Indonesia and Australia need no longer be founded on financial assistance alone. As Indonesia gets richer, its public expenditure will grow, and Australian program of assistance of $1 billion. Now Australia is the biggest donor agency in Indonesia, will be less significant to Indonesia and for building a good and lasting cooperation between the two countries. Looking toward the Asian century, the Australian government has made it clear in its white book, Indonesia Country Strategy, Australia in Asian Century Toward 2025, that the challenge for Australia and for Australian is sustaining future relationship with strategic Asian partners, is to change perception across the community and to harness and develop the skill we need to engage more comprehensively with Indonesia in the Asian century. Again, looking at the peculiarly way Australia has developed to generate reform momentum through its service reform, which has made this country the 10th global economy in 2013, Australia, I think, in a better position to assist Indonesia to direct and escalate its present more restricted bureaucracy reform. I think as a person who used to be the head of the Indonesian civil service, I really yearn in the future there is a strong partnership between APS and ICS. That's my expectation for the future. Thank you very much.
I'm going to pick up a cluster of questions and thoughts from our people that have actually given text messages to us or have come in by Twitter, and maybe our panel might pick up a point or two and reply in our very short time left. So there's a scattering of questions. What needs to change in the APS to become more responsive to positive engagement in Asia? What would an Asia-capable APS look like? What are some of the major benefits Australia can expect from interacting with Asia? Why do Asian countries need Australia? What do Asia-capable leaders look like? Do we need to increase our footprint in Asia specifically or just more globally? How has the integration of AusAid with DFAT strengthened the department's ability to engage in Asia? Where is the emphasis on taking the broader community on the Asian century journey? A Twitter question, what could the Australian Public Service learn from the way public administration works in Asia? And a question about what impact will the current spying issues have on broader relationships with Asia? So who wants to pick up one or more of those points very, very briefly? Chris.
I'll just make a couple of very generic points about the capability. I don't want to be specific, but I think there are two broad principles at the really macro level need to be underlined. One is that no APS officer can ignore the reality of the Asian
Can you
century.
speak closer to the mic? Sorry.
No one can ignore the reality, and as I said in my speech, to do so basically would be a big mistake. And secondly, once you do engage on that reality, you move into a level of granularity about what Asia is. It's good to talk about the Asian century or the Indo-Pacific century, but when it comes down to the APS, it has to be about China, Japan. It's got to be much more specific and granular, much more focused on sectors and much more engaged on the details of that engagement, because it just can't be at the terms of the generalities.
Jenny, do you want to pick up something? Martin, Sofian?
What needs to change? I think it is changing already. We have, I believe, the I believe Steve Sedgwick will be speaking this afternoon, hopefully, on the work that's been undertaken in the APS, but also in state governments. There are significant strategies to look at how we can skill up a whole sector. And as I said, that requires investment, it requires time on task, it requires us to provide opportunities for people to be skilled in the region and develop those relationships with their counterparts. It's an exciting journey.
Martin.
Peter, thank you. Around the issue of APS, what's it need to do? I think it needs to become more open. People need to stop thinking about issues in the here and now and place them in strategic context, and place them in a broader environmental context, and ask not just what does this mean today, what might it mean in the future, and how can we position ourselves for that. And what that really means is actually lifting your eyes up from your day-to-day job. We don't want everybody to do that, but we do want enough people doing it and asking the right sorts of questions. And the second one is, why do Asian countries need Australia? Well, they need Australia in the same way we need them, in the same way we need North Atlantic countries, or sort of Latin American countries, because actually nobody's the repository of all wisdom. I know it's a shock to the APS, but there's a lot of things we can learn from other countries. There's a lot of things they can learn from us, and doing things together is a great way both to learn and to build capability for the future. And we see that very much in the way in which we've approached the Indonesian Fiscal Affairs Agency, where our people in there are not there to do things for the Indonesian counterparts. They're there to learn, and they're there to do things together. And the Indonesian counterparts coming to Australia will be here not to learn from us, but to do things and to work with us together. And that's really important, I think.
Sofian?
Well, I think I have the same, what do you call it, message as that in the future, the APS, as well as ICS, Indonesian Civil Service, can no longer live in isolation. They have to open up. And, well, tomorrow we are going to talk about the global village. In the global village, everybody should open up, and we have to relate each other. And there is no other thing than, I think, that we should develop a level, we have to improve a level of our relationship between the two countries. I think Indonesia has a very strong foundation of relationship with Indonesia when a young Australian diplomat by the name of Tom Critchley fought for Indonesian independence at the United Nations. And that is always been remembered by Indonesian. And I think we should develop or reinvent that strong relationship between the two countries. And because we are the closest neighbor, even though we have rows from time to time, then we still, there is no way to move Australia to other place. And also there is no other way to move Indonesia to other place, make it farther from Australia. So we have to realize that, and we have to base our future relationship on this proximity.
I think that's an excellent way to close the session. Please thank our speakers.